January 15th, 1943. 21:40 hours. Villa Dar es Sada, Casablanca. The palace is quiet, in the way only command centers get quiet after dark. The kind of silence that comes when decisions too large for daylight are being made. Eisenhower sits alone at a mahogany desk that once belonged to a French colonial administrator. An ashtray overflows with Lucky Strike butts. His coffee has gone cold. In his hands a single sheet of intelligence intercept. German radio traffic decoded just hours ago.
The words are simple, but they change everything. Wehrmacht High Command fears only one Allied commander by name, Patton. Eisenhower reads it again, then a third time. His hand trembles slightly as he lights another cigarette. Not Montgomery, who has fought Rommel across North Africa for 2 years. Not the French generals with their decorated histories. Not even Eisenhower himself, Supreme Allied Commander. The Germans fear Patton. Only Patton. The door opens without a knock.
Winston Churchill stands in the threshold, cigar smoke curling around him like morning fog. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has a habit of appearing exactly when you least want him and most need him. This is one of those moments. Churchill walks to the desk, reads over Eisenhower's shoulder. The silence stretches. Outside, palm trees rustle in the Mediterranean wind. Somewhere in the villa, voices discuss tonnage and landing craft and the 1,000 logistical nightmares of invasion. But in this room, 2 men stare at a single paragraph that rewrites the calculus of command. Churchill breaks the silence first. His voice is low, almost gentle. "I must meet this man the Germans fear." Eisenhower sets down the intercept. He does not look up. "Sir, I was hoping to avoid that." "Why?" "Because Patton is—" Eisenhower searches for words that won't sound like insubordination. "He's complicated." Churchill settles into a leather chair, legs crossed, cigar held between 2 fingers like a conductor's baton. He waits. The Prime Minister is very good at waiting. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window. Below, Casablanca spreads out under blackout conditions. No lights, no movement. A city holding its breath while empires negotiate its future. "General Patton is the best armored commander we have." Eisenhower begins. "Maybe the best in the world. His men would follow him through hell. The Germans are right to fear him. But he's a nightmare to command, insubordinate, temperamental, says things that should get him court-martialed, does things that should get him court-martialed. He's already been reprimanded 3 times, and we haven't even put him in a major operation yet." Churchill taps ash into a crystal tray. "The Sicily Command, you're deciding whether to give it to him." It's not a question. Churchill already knows. The Prime Minister knows everything. "I have 48 hours to make the recommendation," Eisenhower says. "Montgomery expects it. The British High Command expects it. Hell, Montgomery's probably already planning his victory parade." "But the Germans don't fear Montgomery." The words hang in the air like smoke. Eisenhower turns from the window. For a moment he looks older than his 52 years. The weight of alliance politics, of managing British and American egos, of holding together a coalition that could fracture at any moment over matters of pride and protocol. He carries all of it in the lines around his eyes. If I give Patton this command, he'll either win brilliantly or blow up the entire alliance. Maybe both. I've been an administrator my whole career, Mr. Prime Minister. I coordinate. I smooth over problems. I make sure supplies reach the right places at the right times. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. And Patton? Patton doesn't coordinate. He attacks. He doesn't smooth over problems. He creates them. And he doesn't care about supplies reaching the right places because he'll just steal German supplies when he runs out of his own. Churchill's eyes gleam with something that might be amusement. "Bring him to me tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. I'll take his measure myself." "Sir, I really think—" "6 o'clock, General." The Prime Minister stands, moves toward the door, then pauses. "Do you know what the Germans call Montgomery?" Eisenhower shakes his head. "Der Vorsichtige, the cautious one. They respect him. They prepare for him. They know he'll come with overwhelming force and meticulous planning, so they dig in and wait. But Patton—" Churchill's voice drops. "They have no name for Patton because they don't understand him, and men fear what they cannot understand." The door closes. Eisenhower is alone again with his cold coffee and the intelligence intercept and a decision that could change the war. He sits down, pulls out a personnel file. George Smith Patton, Jr., 57 years old, West Point class of 1909, Olympic pentathlete, cavalry officer in the age of tanks, 2 pearl-handled revolvers that he wears like a gunfighter. A man who believes he's the reincarnation of ancient warriors who has slept with a copy of Campaigns of Alexander under his pillow since he was 12 years old. The file contains 3 formal reprimands, one for striking a junior officer, one for making inflammatory statements about Allied strategy, one for ignoring direct orders during training exercises. It also contains casualty reports from North Africa. When Patton took command of demoralized units after the disaster at Kasserine Pass, he turned them around in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Combat effectiveness increased 40%. Morale went from broken to ferocious. The man remade an army through sheer force of personality. Eisenhower closes the file. He knows what the smart choice is. The safe choice. Montgomery gets Sicily. Montgomery, who will advance carefully, secure every objective, minimize casualties through methodical preparation. The British will be pleased, the alliance will be stable, and the war will proceed according to plan. But the Germans don't fear the plan. Eisenhower lights another cigarette and watches smoke drift toward the ceiling. The Casablanca Conference has been underway for 3 days. Roosevelt and Churchill and their military chiefs have been locked in rooms throughout the villa, hammering out the future of the war. Operation Symbol, they call it, the symbol of Anglo-American unity. But unity is fragile. The British have been fighting since 1939. 4 years of bombing, rationing, dying. They've lost colonies, ships, entire armies. Their military doctrine has been written in blood across France and Greece and North Africa. And that doctrine says one thing above all else: caution saves lives. The Americans are fresh, eager. They have resources the British can only dream of, but they don't have experience. Not the kind that comes from watching your army evacuate from Dunkirk. Not the kind that comes from standing alone against the Nazi war machine for 2 years while America debated neutrality. This creates tension. The British see American enthusiasm as naivete. The Americans see British caution as defeatism. And in the middle, Eisenhower tries to hold it all together. He's good at it. That's why he was chosen. Not because he's a brilliant tactician or a combat-tested warrior, but because he's a diplomat in a general's uniform. Because he can sit in a room with Montgomery and make the proud British Field Marshal feel valued while gently steering him toward compromise. Because he can translate Roosevelt's grand visions into military operations that won't alienate Churchill. But Patton is not a diplomat. Patton is a sledgehammer, and Eisenhower is about to introduce him to a room full of fine china. The next evening arrives too quickly. Eisenhower waits in the villa's main reception room. The space is decorated in the elaborate style of French colonialism. Ornate moldings, silk wallpaper furniture that looks like it belongs in Versailles. Outside, the sun is setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Churchill arrives first, dressed in his trademark bow tie and vest cigar already lit. He settles into a chair like a king taking a throne. Behind him, 2 British staff officers position themselves against the wall, silent witnesses. Eisenhower makes one last attempt. "Sir, I should warn you. General Patton doesn't have a filter between his thoughts and his mouth. If he thinks something, he says it. Diplomacy is not his strength." Churchill smiles around his cigar. "General, I've been called tactless my entire political career. I rather enjoy people who speak their minds." It's refreshing after spending days with men who say nothing while using 1,000 words. He might offend you. Then I shall be offended. I've survived worse than the opinions of an American general. At precisely 6 o'clock, footsteps echo in the marble hallway. Sharp, military, perfectly timed. The door opens. George S. Patton enters like he's leading a cavalry charge, full-dress uniform pressed so crisp it could cut glass. His medals catch the lamplight, a constellation of bronze and silver across his chest. The pearl-handled revolvers rest in holsters on each hip. His boots are polished to a mirror shine. He snaps a salute so sharp and rigid it's almost a challenge. Eisenhower makes the introductions. Patton's handshake is firm enough to crack walnuts. Churchill studies him with the intensity of a statesman who has spent 40 years reading the souls of men. The Prime Minister doesn't speak immediately. He lets the silence build, watching Patton's face for discomfort or weakness. Patton stares back, unflinching. Finally, Churchill speaks. "General Patton, I've heard remarkable things about you. Most of them are probably true, sir." It's delivered without arrogance, just simple fact. Eisenhower closes his eyes briefly. Churchill's smile widens. "Tell me, General, which historical commander do you admire most?" Patton doesn't hesitate. Not for a heartbeat. Alexander the Great. Why Alexander? Because he understood that speed and audacity can overcome superior numbers. Because he led from the front, and his men loved him for it. Because he won battles that should have been impossible by refusing to accept that they were impossible. Churchill nods slowly, processing this. Leading from the front is considered reckless in modern warfare. A high-ranking officer's value is in his strategic mind, not his personal courage. Patton's jaw tightens.
With respect, sir, those who say that are wrong. The room temperature drops 10 degrees. The British staff officers shift uncomfortably. Eisenhower feels sweat forming at his collar despite the evening coolness. Churchill studies Patton for a long moment. Then he does something Eisenhower doesn't expect. He laughs. Not a polite chuckle. A real laugh, deep and genuine. By God, you remind me of myself 40 years ago.
Everyone told me I was too aggressive, too outspoken, too bloody certain of my own correctness. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps we both are insufferable. But I've found that the insufferable are often the ones who change history. Patton allows himself a slight smile. Churchill leans forward, cigar smoke swirling between them. Let me ask you something, General. Do you believe the Allies are prosecuting this war correctly? Eisenhower's hand moves unconsciously toward his chest, as if to ward off a heart attack. He's glaring at Patton, shaking his head in tiny movements. Don't answer. Please, don't answer. Patton sees the warning, ignores it completely. No, sir, I do not. The British officers look like they've been slapped. One of them opens his mouth to protest, but Churchill waves him to silence. Explain. And Patton steps forward, and suddenly he's not just a general in a fancy uniform. He's a professor delivering a lecture on the only subject that matters to him. The Allied strategy is too cautious. We have the resources to attack everywhere all the time. We have more men, more tanks, more planes, more of everything. But we fight like we're the ones who are outnumbered. We prepare and we plan and we wait until every detail is perfect. And while we're perfecting our plans, the Germans are fortifying their positions. The British have been fighting since 1939, Churchill says quietly. We've learned the price of aggression through devastating experience. And I respect that, sir. Truly. But with equal respect, I believe caution kills soldiers just as surely as recklessness. Maybe more slowly, but just as surely. How so? Patton moves to a map on the wall, points at North Africa. When you're defensive, you let the enemy choose the time and place of engagement. You react to their moves. But when you're aggressive, when you're always attacking, you keep them off balance. Even when outnumbered, the attacker can concentrate forces at a chosen point, while the defender has to spread out trying to protect everything. He turns back to face the room. The Germans are brilliant at defense. Give them time to prepare and they'll make you pay in blood for every mile. But keep them moving, keep them reacting, never let them set their feet. That's how you beat them.
Churchill exchanges a glance with Eisenhower. The Supreme Commander looks like a man watching a car crash in slow motion. You realize, Churchill says, that you're advocating for the exact opposite of current British military doctrine. I'm advocating for what works, sir. Several British officers look visibly offended. One starts to speak, but again Churchill silences him with a gesture.
The Prime Minister stands, walks to the window, looks out at the darkening sky. When he speaks, his voice is thoughtful. General Eisenhower, where did you find such a man? Eisenhower's response is weak, almost defeated. He found himself, sir. My job is just to point him at the enemy. Churchill turns back to Patton. You're either brilliant or insane, General. Patton's smile is sharp as broken glass. I've been told the two are often the same thing, sir. For the first time since the meeting began, Churchill looks genuinely delighted. He crosses the room, extends his hand. I like you, General Patton. You remind me of myself 40 years ago. Probably insufferable, then definitely insufferable now, but by God we get results. The handshake is firm, mutual respect between two men who understand what the others in the room cannot. That war is not a chess game played from a safe distance. That sometimes the boldest move is the sanest one. That bureaucracy and caution have their place, but so does the shock of audacity. The formal meeting continues for another hour. They discuss Sicily logistics coordination with British forces, but the decision has already been made, though Eisenhower doesn't know it yet. As Patton leaves, snapping another perfect salute, Churchill watches him go with an expression that's hard to read. When the door closes, the Prime Minister turns to Eisenhower. Keep him. Sir, you saw what just happened. He insulted our entire strategy. He challenged our assumptions. There's a difference. Keep him for Sicily. Mr. Prime Minister, with respect, he's a diplomatic nightmare. If he speaks like this to the press or to other Allied commanders, then manage him. Isn't that your job? Coordination and diplomacy? Churchill settles back into his chair, relight his cigar. Let me tell you what I see in that man, General. I see a pure warrior.
Possibly the last of his kind. Modern warfare is becoming industrial, mechanical. It's about spreadsheets and logistics chains and bureaucratic planning. All necessary, all important. But sometimes in the crucial moment you need someone who fights with their heart instead of their head. He fights with both, Eisenhower says quietly. That's what makes him dangerous. Exactly, that's what makes him valuable. Eisenhower sits down heavily. He's tired of politics.
Tired of managing egos, tired of making decisions that could get thousands of men killed. Mr. Prime Minister, I need to be honest with you. I'm not a combat commander. I've never led men in battle. I'm an administrator who got promoted because I'm good at keeping everyone from killing each other in staff meetings. When the shooting starts, I'm in a headquarters somewhere pushing pins on a map. And Patton scares me because he doesn't think like an administrator. He thinks like someone from another century, like a Viking or a Mongol or one of Alexander's cavalry commanders. He belongs in an age of glory and honor and personal combat, not in this mechanized industrial war we're fighting. Churchill is quiet for a long moment. The villa has gone silent again. The meetings have ended for the day. Somewhere staffers are typing reports. Somewhere Roosevelt and his advisors are discussing Pacific strategy. But in this room, an old British statesman and a worried American general are deciding the fate of an island and maybe a war. Tell me something, General Eisenhower. When the moment comes when you need someone to break through enemy lines and you can't wait 2 weeks for perfect conditions, would you send your most careful commander or would you send the man who just left this room? Eisenhower has no answer because he already knows the answer. Churchill stands, prepares to leave, then pauses at the door. Patton is an anachronism, a man born out of time, but he's our anachronism general, and there will be many times in the coming years when we'll need a man who fights with his heart. Keep him, use him. When the moment comes that requires the impossible, you'll be grateful you have him. The door closes. Eisenhower sits alone in the ornate room surrounded by the trappings of French colonial wealth carrying the weight of decisions that will ripple across continents. He thinks about the intelligence intercept. Wehrmacht High Command fears only one Allied commander, Patton. He thinks about Montgomery, methodical and brilliant, who will secure every objective at acceptable cost. He thinks about Churchill's question. The careful commander, or the man in the next room. Outside night has fallen completely. Casablanca is dark and quiet. Tomorrow there will be more meetings, more planning, more diplomatic maneuvering. But tonight, a decision crystallizes. Eisenhower pulls out a personnel form, picks up a pen. Under recommended for Sicily command. He hesitates only a moment before writing a name. George S. Patton Jr. S. Patton. He sets down the pen, lights a cigarette, and wonders if he's just made the best decision of the war or the worst mistake of his career. In 48 hours, he'll submit the recommendation. In 6 months, the world will have its answer. But tonight, in a villa in Casablanca, the die is cast. The Germans fear Patton. Now the Allies will find out why. July 9th, 1943, 22:45 hours, the Mediterranean Sea. Operation Husky begins not with trumpets, but with the sound of landing craft engines cutting through dark water. 160,000 Allied troops approach Sicily from the south, the largest amphibious invasion in history to this point. Larger even than Gallipoli, though no one mentions Gallipoli. That name carries too much British blood. 2 armies, 2 philosophies, 1 island, 1. On the eastern beaches, British 8th Army under Bernard Montgomery comes ashore with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. Every unit knows its objective. Every supply dump has been plotted to the meter. Every contingency has been war-gamed in a dozen staff meetings. Montgomery has spent months planning this operation. He will not rush. He will not improvise. He will advance when ready and not a moment before. On the southern beaches, American 7th Army under George Patton hits the sand like a thunderstorm. The planning has been minimal. The objectives are simple. Move fast. Hit hard. Don't stop. In London, Winston Churchill follows the invasion on maps that cover an entire wall of the war rooms. Pins and flags and coloured lines showing the advance of forces. He smokes cigar after cigar watching the 2 sectors diverge in real time. Montgomery's sector, steady, methodical, every village secured before moving to the next. Patton's sector, a red arrow stabbing north like a dagger. Churchill's military secretary, a careful man who has served 3 prime ministers, points out the obvious. Sir, the American advance is dangerously exposed. They've outrun their supply lines. Their flanks are vulnerable. General Patton appears to be ignoring every principle of what? Churchill interrupts. Of proper warfare, of acceptable risk. Of common sense, sir. Churchill doesn't respond immediately. He's watching the map. Patton's forces have covered 30 miles in 2 days. Montgomery's forces have covered 8. Both are meeting resistance. Both are taking casualties.
but one is moving like a force of nature, and the other is moving like a chess player. "Tell me," Churchill says finally, "how many casualties has each sector sustained?" The Secretary consults reports.
British 8th Army, approximately 400. American 7th Army, approximately 350. So Patton is moving 4 times faster and losing fewer men. For now, sir. But the exposure? Has the German counterattack materialized? A pause. No, sir? Why not? The Secretary has no answer. Churchill provides it. Because Patton is moving too fast for them to organize one. By the time they concentrate forces to hit his flanks, he's already somewhere else.
Speed itself becomes a protection.
Churchill taps ash from his cigar eyes still on the map. General Patton doesn't fight like a modern commander at all. He fights like a cavalry officer who traded horses for tanks, and the Germans can't keep up. The days blur into a week, then 2 weeks. Montgomery's advance continues with textbook precision. Every hilltop secured, every road junction fortified, supply lines perfect. By the book. The book that has been written in British blood across 4 years of war. Patton's advance looks like chaos. Units bypass enemy strongpoints, entirely leaving them for follow-up forces. Tanks run out of fuel, and Patton orders them to capture German supply depots. When told this isn't proper procedure, Patton reportedly says something unprintable and keeps moving. 100 miles in the first week. British officers in Sicily send increasingly alarmed reports to London. The American sector is a disaster waiting to happen. Patton has violated every principle of warfare. His army should collapse under counterattack at any moment. Churchill reads these reports with growing fascination. The counterattack never comes. By the end of the 3rd week, a pattern has emerged. Montgomery is winning his sector through overwhelming force and careful planning. Patton is winning his sector through speed and violence, and an almost supernatural ability to keep his army moving on nothing but momentum and captured supplies. The casualty ratios remain roughly equal. But Patton's forces have covered 3 times the ground. Churchill writes in his private diary, a leather-bound book that will remain sealed for 20 years. Patton proves that warfare is as much art as science. Montgomery is the scientist perfecting his formulas. Patton is the artist breaking every rule to create something new. Both have their place, but sometimes only the artist can create a masterpiece. August 3rd, 1943. A field hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. General Patton is making his rounds visiting wounded men. He does this often. He believes soldiers fight harder when they know their commander sees them as individuals, not statistics. He moves between cots, shaking hands, handing out medals, making jokes. The men love him for it. Then he comes to a private sitting on a cot, head in hands, no visible wounds. "What's wrong with you?" Patton asks. The soldier looks up. His eyes are hollow.
"My nerves, sir. I can't take it anymore."
What happens next takes less than 10 seconds, but will reverberate for months. Patton's face darkens. He calls the man a coward. He slaps him across the face with his glove. Then he pulls one of his pearl-handled revolvers and waves it at the soldier, shouting that he should be lined up against a wall and shot. Medical staff intervene. Patton leaves. The soldier sits on the cot, stunned and shaking. 7 days later, Patton does it again. Different hospital, different soldier, same result. The news travels like electricity through a wire. First to Eisenhower's headquarters, then to Washington, then to the press. The American media explodes. Congressman after congressman demands Patton's immediate relief. Editorial pages call him a disgrace to the uniform. Radio commentators question his sanity. The slapping incidents dominate headlines for a week. In London, Churchill receives a coded cable from Eisenhower. Short, blunt. Patton's situation untenable. Recommending relief of command. Awaiting your thoughts. Churchill reads it 3 times. Then he calls for his private secretary. "Get me a secure line to General Eisenhower. Immediately." The call goes through an hour later. Eisenhower sounds exhausted. "Mr. Prime Minister, I don't see how I can keep him. The political pressure." "How many days did it take Montgomery to secure his objectives in Sicily?" A pause on the line. 38 days, sir. And Patton? 38 days as well, but Patton covered 3 times the ground, captured twice as many prisoners. And if I recall, the final reports correctly sustained slightly fewer casualties despite the increased operational tempo. Mr. Prime Minister, this isn't about Sicily. It's about conduct unbecoming. It's about whether you can afford to lose the man who just won Sicily faster than anyone thought possible. Eisenhower's sigh is audible across the Atlantic. "Sir, it's a moral question. He struck enlisted men suffering from combat fatigue. That's not just a breach of protocol. It's wrong." Churchill lights a fresh cigar, considers his words carefully. "General, let me ask you something. How many Allied soldiers died in Sicily?" "Approximately 2,400. And how many do you estimate would have died if the campaign had lasted 60 days instead of 38? Silence on the line. I can't calculate that, sir. I can. Approximately 3,500 based on daily casualty rates. So Patton's speed saved roughly 1,100 Allied lives. Against that, we weigh 2 slapping incidents and the psychological trauma of 2 soldiers. Mr. Prime Minister, I don't think we can... I'm not finished, General. I'm not defending what Patton did. It was wrong, cruel, inexcusable. But we're not in the business of moral philosophy. We're in the business of winning a war against an enemy that will exterminate entire peoples if we lose. So the question is not whether Patton is a good man. The question is whether we can win without him. Another pause, longer this time. Can you name me one other commander who can achieve what Patton achieves? Churchill asks. No, sir. Neither can I. So here is what you will do. You will punish him publicly. You will force him to apologize to both soldiers, to the medical staffs, and to every division under his command. You will humiliate him thoroughly, but you will not relieve him. Because in 6 months we will need him for the invasion of Europe, and without him more soldiers will die. Eisenhower's voice is quiet when he responds. You're asking me to choose military effectiveness over morality. I'm asking you to choose which morality matters more. The morality of proper conduct, or the morality of bringing soldiers home alive. Both are real. Both matter. But you command in wartime, General. You don't have the luxury of choosing both. The line goes quiet. Churchill can hear Eisenhower breathing, wrestling with a decision no staff college prepared him for. Finally, Eisenhower speaks. I'll keep him sidelined temporarily. Reprimand him officially. Force the apologies. But I won't relieve him. Good. And General, yes, sir. History will judge both of us for this. We should be prepared for that. The line goes dead. Churchill sets down the phone and stares at the wall map of Sicily. All those red and blue pins, each one representing hundreds of men. Some alive because Patton moved fast, some traumatized because Patton lost his temper. War is not an equation that balances neatly. He writes a note in his diary. Patton is a bastard, but he is a brilliant bastard. In the highest stakes gamble of this war, I will choose a brilliant bastard over a pleasant mediocrity every time. God forgive me if I am wrong. December 1943, London. The slapping incidents have faded from headlines, but not from memory. Patton has made his apologies, each one painful and public. He remains in Sicily sidelined, watching other generals prepare for the great invasion of Europe that everyone knows is coming. In a windowless room beneath Whitehall, British intelligence officers are planning the greatest deception in military history. Operation Fortitude. The plan to convince Hitler that the invasion of Europe will strike at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. Everything depends on making the Germans believe the lie, and for that they need bait. The head of intelligence lays out the problem for Churchill. We need to create a fictional army group. First United States Army Group, we're calling it. Position it across from Calais. Make the Germans believe that's where we'll strike. But the deception only works if they believe it's commanded by someone they fear. Churchill already knows where this is going. Patton. Yes, sir. German intelligence is obsessed with him. They think he's the finest Allied commander. They won't believe a major invasion could happen without him at the spearhead. So you want to use his reputation as a psychological weapon? Exactly, sir. But there's a problem. Churchill waits. Patton will hate it. He wants to be in the first wave leading the assault. Telling him he's commanding a fake army will be devastating to his ego, Churchill finishes, which is considerable. The intelligence officer nods. Churchill thinks for a moment, then smiles. Don't tell him it's fake. Sir, tell him he's being held in reserve for the most important mission of all. Tell him the initial assault is just the opening move. Tell him he's being saved for the decisive blow, the breakout, the race across France that will end the war. Appeal to his sense of destiny. But that's manipulation, sir. Of course it is. It's also brilliant. Patton's ego becomes our weapon. The Germans will see him at Calais and assume that's where the real invasion is. Meanwhile, we hit Normandy with everything we have. By the time they realize Patton is a decoy, we'll have a beachhead they can't dislodge. The plan is approved. Patton is given command of 1st United States Army Group, an army that exists only on paper and in German intelligence estimates. He accepts the command with obvious frustration, but also with the belief that he's being saved for something special. Because that's what Eisenhower tells him. That's what everyone tells him. The lie works perfectly. German reserves stay pinned at Calais waiting for Patton. The real invasion hits Normandy on June 6, 1944. The Germans are caught off balance, uncertain if this is the main assault or a diversion. By the time they realize the truth, Allied forces are ashore and digging in.
Churchill later tells his staff,
Patton was too important to be a decoy in his own mind, so we convinced him he was too important not to be one. His ego saved thousands of lives without firing a shot. August 1st, 1944. Normandy breakout. Patton is finally unleashed. Third Army becomes operational, and Patton leads them out of the Normandy bocage like a force of nature. The careful grinding advance of June and July transforms into a blitzkrieg that shocks both friend and enemy. Churchill follows the advance from London with mounting excitement. His military secretary updates him hourly. Sir, Third Army has advanced 40 miles in the last 3 days. Casualties. Lower than projected. They're moving too fast for the Germans to organize effective resistance. And Montgomery's sector. A slight hesitation. 15 miles in the same period. Consolidated positions. All objectives secured. Churchill studies the map. The contrast is stark. Montgomery's forces inch forward with overwhelming preparation. Patton's forces race across France like cavalry, leaving bypassed German units stunned in their wake. 2 weeks later, the numbers become impossible to ignore. Third Army has advanced 150 miles. Other Allied units have advanced 40 to 60 miles. Patton is moving at a pace that defies every established rule of logistics. Eisenhower calls Churchill, and for the first time there's wonder in his voice instead of worry. Mr. Prime Minister, I don't understand how he's doing it. He should have run out of fuel days ago. His supply lines are stretched impossibly thin, but he keeps finding ways to keep moving. How? He's capturing German fuel depots. He's commandeering civilian trucks. Yesterday he threatened to shoot his own logistics officer if the man didn't figure out how to get gasoline to the front.
It's insane. It shouldn't work. But it's working. Churchill chuckles. It's not a victory of logistics, General. It's a victory of pure will. Patton is literally willing his army forward through the force of his personality. He writes in his diary that night, Patton proves that sometimes an artist can create masterpieces only by breaking every rule. Montgomery is painting a perfect portrait with careful brushstrokes. Patton is throwing paint at the canvas with abandon. Both will finish. But one will finish months sooner. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The Germans launched their last great offensive in the West. 3 armies, 28 divisions, 250,000 men crashing through the Ardennes in a desperate bid to split the Allied lines and capture Antwerp. The attack catches everyone by surprise. American units are overrun, entire divisions encircled. Within 48 hours, the German advance has created a massive bulge in the Allied lines. Most critically, the town of Bastogne is surrounded. 15,000 American soldiers trapped running low on ammunition, freezing in the worst winter Europe has seen in decades. Other commanders need time to reposition forces, time to organize a counterattack, time to plan. Patton is in a staff meeting when news of the offensive arrives. Before anyone can speak, he's already at the map. We attack in 48 hours. His staff stares at him. Sir, that's impossible. We'd need to pivot the entire Third Army 90 degrees. That's 130,000 men, 11,000 vehicles across 100 miles in a blizzard. Standard planning estimates 2 weeks minimum for an operation this scale. Patton doesn't look up from the map. Then we'll do it in 48 hours. I want 3 contingency plans ready by midnight. We're relieving Bastogne. One officer tries to explain why it can't be done. Patton cuts him off. The men in Bastogne don't have 2 weeks, they have days before they're killed or captured. We move in 48 hours or we don't move at all. The staff scrambles. Patton has already wargamed this exact scenario. He's had contingency plans for a German counteroffensive ready for months because Patton always has contingency plans. While other generals hope for the best, Patton prepares for the worst. 48 hours later, Third Army begins its pivot. 133,178 men, 11,000 vehicles, 100 miles through snow and ice. Roads become parking lots. Supply trucks jam every intersection. Soldiers march through blizzards with inadequate winter gear, and somehow impossibly they keep moving. Eisenhower calls Churchill at 0300 hours London time. He's attempting the impossible. Churchill is awake immediately. Will he succeed? I don't know. The weather is catastrophic. The roads are nightmares, but he's moving forces faster than anyone thought possible. That's what we keep him for, General. December 26th, 1944. After 4 days of the most brutal winter fighting, Patton's 4th Armoured Division breaks through to Bastogne. The relief is not clean or simple. It's bought with blood and frostbite and men pushed beyond their breaking point. But it happens.
Churchill cables Eisenhower immediately. This maneuver will be studied for generations. One of the most remarkable achievements in military history. Please convey my admiration to General Patton. In Parliament, Churchill makes the maneuver public. He's careful with his words, but the message is clear. We should judge our commanders not by their adherence to conventional wisdom, but by their results. Some generals win slowly and safely. Some win quickly and dangerously. Both have their place. But when our soldiers are trapped and dying, I know which type I want. The speech is controversial. British military brass grumble about American recklessness. But the soldiers understand. And in the frozen forests of Belgium, 15,000 American troops understand better than anyone. The numbers tell the story Patton's defenders need. Forces moved 133,000, distance 100 miles, weather blizzard conditions, time 4 days from decision to relief, standard estimate 2 weeks minimum, lives saved 15,000 plus. Privately, Churchill tells an aide, if Britain had possessed a commander with Patton's audacity in 1940, we might have driven the Germans back across the Channel before France fell. We didn't have such a man. We had careful men, brave men, but not audacious men. Patton is worth 10 divisions simply because the enemy can never predict what he'll do next. March 22nd, 1945. The Rhine River. Montgomery has spent months planning Operation Plunder. The crossing will be the largest military operation since D-Day. 1,400 tons of fuel, 80,000 men, 5,000 artillery pieces, 2 months of preparation, every detail calculated. The operation is scheduled for March 24th. On March 22nd, Patton finds a weak point in German defences near Oppenheim. He doesn't request permission. He doesn't wait for coordination. He sends his forces across the Rhine in the middle of the night with minimal preparation. By dawn, the east bank is secured. Patton reportedly calls Eisenhower and says, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm across." Eisenhower, "Across what?" Patton, "The Rhine. I sneaked a division over last night." British officers are furious. Montgomery has been planning for months, and Patton just improvised a crossing in one night. It's seen as showboating, as upstaging as typically American arrogance. Churchill hears the news and laughs so hard he needs a moment to catch his breath. His military secretary is less amused. "Sir, this is quite irregular. General Montgomery has been coordinating." "Montgomery is the model of what a modern general should be," Churchill interrupts. "Thorough, methodical, careful. Everything done properly. Patton is everything a modern general should not be. Impulsive, reckless, impossible to coordinate with, and yet—" He trails off, looking at the map. "And yet," the secretary prompts, "and yet Montgomery will cross the Rhine with overwhelming force in 2 days. Patton has already crossed. The war will end 1 day sooner because of him. Perhaps 2 days, perhaps a week. And every day the war continues, soldiers die. So I approve of results above all else." That night, Churchill writes to Eisenhower, "General Patton is impossible, insufferable, a nightmare for alliance management. Yet future historians will study his Rhine crossing as a textbook example of how audacity wins wars. Keep managing him, General. Keep pointing him at the enemy. And keep counting the days you've shaved off this nightmare." But even as Churchill writes, he knows something is shifting. The war in Europe is nearly over. Germany is collapsing. And men like Patton, warriors from another age, will soon have no place in the world being born. The question is becoming less about how to use Patton and more about what to do with him when there are no more enemies to fight. That answer will come soon, and it will satisfy no one. April 12th, 1945. The Elbe River, Germany. Third Army sits on the western bank, engines idling. Ahead lies open country, demoralized German units, and 2 cities that will define the next 50 years, Berlin and Prague. Patton stands at the riverbank with his maps calculating distances, fuel requirements, resistance levels. His staff knows that look. He's planning an attack that hasn't been authorized. "We can be in Prague in 48 hours, Patton says to no one in particular. "Berlin in 72, before the Russians get there." His chief of staff clears his throat. "Sir, we have explicit orders. Hold at the Elbe. Do not advance beyond the agreed occupation zones." Patton doesn't look up from his maps. "Those orders are wrong. Sir, the Russians are not our allies. They're our next enemy. Everyone can see it except the politicians. We should keep advancing. Take Berlin. Take Prague. Establish positions the Soviets can't dislodge, because if we don't, we'll be fighting them in 5 years, maybe 10, but we'll be fighting them." The chief of staff says nothing. There's nothing to say. Patton isn't wrong, but orders are orders. Patton finally looks up, frustration carved into every line of his face. "Get me a secure line to Eisenhower." The call goes through an hour later. Eisenhower sounds tired. He's been tired for months now, managing the end of a war that's consuming itself in political complexity. George must know what you're going to say. The answer is no. Ike, listen to me. The Russians are our allies, per agreements made at the highest levels of government. Are our future enemies. You know it. I know it. Churchill knows it. A long pause on the line. What Churchill knows and what Churchill can do are two different things. The occupation zones were agreed upon by Roosevelt and Stalin. We are bound by those agreements. Roosevelt is making a mistake that will haunt us for generations. That's not your decision to make, or mine. Hold at the Elba, George. That's a direct order. Patton's hand tightens on the phone. How many American soldiers are going to die in 20 years because we stopped here? I don't know, but I know how many will die right now if we start a war with the Soviet Union. Stand down, General. That's final. The line goes dead. Patton stares at the Elbe River, at the road to Prague beyond it, at the future he can see so clearly and is powerless to prevent. His aide finds him there an hour later, still staring east. Sir, orders. We hold, as ordered. But that night Patton writes in his diary words that will haunt historians for decades. We have defeated the wrong enemy. Someday someone will have to fight the war we should have fought now, and they will curse us for our blindness. In London, Churchill receives a coded message from Patton the next morning. Unprecedented. A clear breach of protocol. But Patton has never cared about protocol, and Churchill suspects this will be the last time the general reaches out. The message is brief. Request permission to advance to Prague and Berlin before Soviet occupation. Will resign commission and accept all consequences if denied. But someone must say this stopping now is strategic insanity. The Russians are not our friends. They are our next war. Respectfully, Patton. Churchill reads it 3 times in the privacy of his study. Then he does something rare. He sits in silence for 5 full minutes, cigar unlit, staring at the words. His military secretary enters, sees the telegram, reads it over Churchill's shoulder. Sir, this is gross insubordination. General Patton is bypassing the entire chain of command. I'm aware. He should be court-martialed immediately. Churchill finally lights his cigar, takes a long draw. Tell me something. Is he wrong? The secretary blinks, caught off guard. About the Russians, sir. That's not the point. The point is protocol proper channels. Is he wrong? A long silence. Finally, the secretary speaks quietly. No, sir. I don't believe he is. Churchill nods slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Neither do I. But politically we're bound. Roosevelt has made agreements with Stalin that we cannot break. The Americans believe they can work with the Soviets after the war. They're tragically mistaken, but they won't discover that for several years. By then, it will be too late. So, what do we tell General Patton? Churchill drafts the response himself, each word carefully chosen. Your strategic assessment is shared at the highest levels. However, political realities bind us to current occupation agreements. Military force cannot solve this problem at this time. Stand down. History will prove you correct, though not in time to change present policy. The warrior sees clearly, but the world is not yet ready to look. With deep regret, Churchill. He sends it, then adds a note to his private diary, the leather-bound book that will remain sealed until after his death. Patton sees the coming Cold War more clearly than any politician in Washington or London. In 20 years, perhaps 30, the world will deeply regret not listening to this warrior's warning. But we are war-weary. The public has no appetite for continued conflict. So we will stop where politics dictates, not where strategy suggests. And we will pay for this decision in ways we cannot yet imagine. I fear Patton is right about everything except our courage to act upon it. July 17th, 1945. Potsdam, Germany. The conference to decide post-war Europe is underway in what remains of a once grand palace. Truman has replaced the dead Roosevelt. Churchill represents Britain, though he senses his own political end approaching. Stalin represents the Soviet Union and 17 million dead Russians and an army that has conquered half of Europe. The city around them is biblical in its destruction. Berlin has been bombed, shelled, and fought over street by street. Entire neighborhoods are gone. Just rubble and dust and the smell of death that lingers even months after the guns fell silent. Patton is not part of the official conference, but Churchill requests a private meeting. 7 o'clock in a requisitioned villa on the outskirts. No staff, no witnesses, no record. The villa is one of the few buildings still standing, though shrapnel has pockmarked its walls and several windows are covered with boards. The furniture is mismatched, scavenged from other ruins. But there's whiskey. Good Scottish single malt that Churchill brought from London. Patton arrives at precisely 7 o'clock, always punctual, always in perfect uniform. But something has changed in his bearing. The fire that always burned in him seems banked now, like coals cooling after the forge has been abandoned. Churchill pours 2 generous glasses without asking. They sit across from each other in salvaged chairs. 2 old men in a destroyed city drinking to the end of a war neither quite believes is over. For a long moment, neither speaks. Outside, the summer sun sets over the ruins of the Third Reich, painting the wreckage in shades of amber and blood. Churchill breaks the silence. What will you do now that the war is won? Patton stares into his whiskey glass like it might hold answers. I don't know, Mr. Prime Minister. I truly don't know. He looks up and Churchill is struck by something he's never seen before in Patton's eyes. Not fear, not doubt, but a kind of existential exhaustion. I'm a warrior, Patton continues. It's not what I do. It's what I am. I'm 59 years old. I've spent my entire adult life preparing for war or fighting in war. Every decision I've made, every skill I've developed, every part of my soul has been shaped for this purpose. And now... He trails off, gestures vaguely at the window at the destroyed city beyond. Now what? Peace? I don't know how to do peace. I don't know how to sit in an office and manage occupation duties and fill out requisition forms. That's not living. That's just existing. Churchill swirls his whiskey, choosing his words with rare care. You could retire. Write your memoirs. They would be extraordinary. Spend time with your family. Patton's laugh is bitter and brief. I'd rather be shot. No, sir, I'll be honest with you, because I've always been honest with you. I want another war. Churchill sets down his glass carefully as if it might shatter. Against whom? The Russians. They're already consolidating their grip on Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania. They're not liberating these countries, they're conquering them. Installing puppet governments, crushing dissent. And we're letting it happen because we're too exhausted to fight anymore. The world is war-weary, General, particularly the Americans. They want their boys home. They want normalcy. They have no appetite for another global conflict. Not now, perhaps not ever again. I know, Patton says quietly, but that doesn't change what's coming. Churchill studies the younger man's face. Younger, though not by much anymore. Both of them old warriors now contemplating a world that no longer needs what they offer. You're a man born in the wrong century, Churchill says finally. It's not the first time he's said it, but this time it lands differently. Not as observation, but as epitaph. Patton nods slowly. I know. I should have lived in Alexander's time, or Caesar's, or Napoleon's, an age where wars were won by courage and audacity and the force of individual will. Not this industrial slaughter we've just finished. Millions dead, cities obliterated, and for what? So we can hand half of Europe to another dictator. Stalin is not Hitler. No, he's worse, because Hitler was obviously evil. The world could unite against him. But Stalin is our ally. He speaks the language of liberation and equality while building an empire of slaves, and because we fought beside him, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt for years, maybe decades, until finally someone finds the courage to say what I'm saying now. Churchill is quiet for a long moment. Then he stands, walks to the window, looks out at the sunset over Berlin. I will say it, he promises. Not immediately, not while the alliance is still fresh, but I will say it. Iron Curtain, Cold War, the coming confrontation with Soviet totalitarianism. I'll warn them. Will they listen? Churchill's smile is sad. No, not most of them. Not soon enough. People need to learn some lessons through pain before they accept them as truth. But perhaps in 5 years, 10 years, someone will remember what was said here and act accordingly. He turns from the window, faces Patton directly. The tragedy, General, is that you're right about almost everything. The Russians, the strategic mistake we're making, the war we'll eventually have to fight. You see it all so clearly. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? The timing. The world isn't ready for your truth yet. Perhaps in 1950, perhaps 1960, but not now. So your warnings will go unheeded, your strategic genius will be wasted, and history will vindicate you only after it's too late to matter. Patton drains his whiskey in one swallow. Then what's the point? What's the point of seeing the future if you can't change it? The point, Churchill says gently, is that someone must bear witness. Someone must say the difficult truth even knowing it won't be believed. Because when the future you predicted arrives, people will remember that someone warned them. And perhaps they'll listen the next time. They sit in silence as darkness falls over Berlin. 2 difficult men. two brilliant men. Two men who shaped the 20th century and are now discovering that the century has moved beyond them. Finally, Patton stands. The meeting is over. They both know they'll never see each other again. At the door, Patton extends his hand. Churchill takes it. The grip is firm, but brief. "Thank you," Patton says simply, "for understanding me when no one else did." Churchill holds his gaze. "Thank you for being exactly what we needed when we needed it most. The world required a warrior of your caliber. It was my privilege to recognize that and act upon it." Patton nods once, then turns and walks into the gathering darkness. Churchill watches him go, then returns to his whiskey and his diary. He writes, "Final meeting with Patton." He fights the next war in his mind already. The war against the Soviets. The war we should fight, but won't. He's right about the threat, right about the strategic necessity, right about the historical consequences of inaction. But he's wrong about our capacity to act. We are spent, exhausted. The American public wants peace at any price, even the price of half of Europe. Patton will fade now or self-destruct. The world will lose a voice it desperately needs, but cannot yet bear to hear. In this, as in so many things, the warrior sees more clearly than the statesman, to our eternal regret. December 9th, 1945, 11:45 hours, near Mannheim, Germany. The staff car moves at 15 miles per hour down a road Patton has driven dozens of times. It's a clear day, cold, but sunny. The kind of winter morning that feels clean and fresh after years of smoke and fire. An army supply truck pulls out from a side street. The driver is young, maybe 19. He's thinking about going home, about a girl in Kansas, about anything except the staff car approaching from his left. He doesn't see it, or sees it too late. The collision is minor, a fender bender, the kind that happens 10,000 times a day across occupied Europe, the kind that causes paperwork and annoyance but nothing more. Except Patton isn't wearing his seatbelt, never does. Says it's for men who fear death. His body lurches forward as the car stops abruptly. Then his head snaps back, whiplash motion violent despite the low speed. The sound is quiet, almost gentle, like a dry branch breaking on a cold day. Cervical vertebrae, spinal cord. Medical terms that mean one simple thing: the warrior is broken. They rush him to the hospital in Heidelberg. He's conscious, fully aware, his mind sharp as ever, but his body won't obey, paralyzed from the neck down, trapped. The doctors work frantically because this is General George S. Patton, hero of Sicily and Normandy and Bastogne and 100 battles. This is the man who cannot die, who survived everything the Wehrmacht could throw at him, who laughed at danger and death and emerged victorious from every confrontation. But medical science in 1945 has limits. Spinal injuries of this severity are beyond their ability to heal. They can stabilize, they can hope, they can watch. 12 days later, infections set in, complications develop. The body begins to fail in ways that courage cannot overcome. On December 21st, 1945, at 17:45 hours, George Smith Patton Jr. dies in a hospital bed surrounded by white walls and the smell of antiseptic. No battlefield, no sword in hand, no glory. Just a quiet ending in a quiet room, the warrior's death denied. The telegram reaches Churchill in London 2 hours later.
He's in his study working on a speech about the Iron Curtain descending across Europe, trying to warn a world that doesn't want to hear warnings. The message is brief.
Military efficiency. Regret to inform, General George S. Patton died 17:45 hours today from complications related to injuries sustained in motor vehicle accident, Eisenhower. Churchill reads it once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might change the words. He sets it down carefully as if it's fragile. Then he does something his private secretary has rarely witnessed. His hands shake, his eyes become wet. "No," he says to the empty room, "not like this." The secretary, drawn by the sound, enters quietly. "Sir, it's wrong," Churchill says, still staring at the telegram. "Fundamentally wrong. That such a man should die in a traffic accident. He deserved a warrior's death, on the battlefield, leading a charge, something worthy of the life he lived, not this mundane absurdity." He stands abruptly, begins pacing. "Do you know what the Greeks believed, that the gods grant meaningful deaths to their heroes? Achilles at Troy, Hector defending his city. Heroes die in ways that match their lives. But Patton, 15 miles per hour, a supply truck, 12 days in a hospital bed. Where's the meaning in that? Where's the justice?" The secretary has no answer. There is no answer. Churchill composes himself with visible effort, then drafts a cable to Eisenhower. Profoundly shaken by news of General Patton's passing, lost one of the great captains of this war, a difficult man, an impossible man,
but a man who could fight like no other. The world is diminished by his loss. Please convey my deepest condolences to his family and my respect to his memory. Churchill. Then he requests time before Parliament. The request is granted immediately. On December the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, Churchill stands before the House of Commons to speak about a man most British officers spent years complaining about. The chamber is full. Everyone knows this tribute matters. Churchill begins without notes. General George S. Patton was the antithesis of British military tradition. Where we valued caution, he embodied aggression. Where we prized careful planning, he believed in audacious improvisation. Where we sought to minimize casualties through methodical advance, he won battles through speed that defied conventional wisdom. He pauses, lets that sink in. By every measure of proper military conduct, General Patton should have failed. He violated doctrine. He ignored established procedures. He made our staff officers apoplectic with his recklessness. And yet, another pause. The chamber is absolutely silent. And yet, by the only measure that ultimately matters in war, he succeeded brilliantly. The Rhine crossing, the relief of Bastogne, the race across France. Each operation achieved its objectives faster and often with fewer casualties than more conventional approaches. How many lives were saved by that speed? We cannot calculate precisely, but the number is significant. Churchill's voice softens slightly. General Patton was not an easy man to work with. He was profane, politically naive, temperamentally unsuited for peacetime command. But when civilization required warriors of exceptional skill and courage, he answered that call without hesitation. History will debate his methods, but history cannot debate his results. He looks across the chamber, making eye contact with members on both sides.
The world needed such men in its darkest hour. Men who could see what needed to be done and had the courage to do it, regardless of convention or personal cost. We were fortunate that General Patton fought on our side. The outcome of this war might have been very different had he not. The tribute concludes with respectful silence, then sustained applause. But Churchill knows the truth. Half the chamber applauds from relief rather than respect. The difficult man is gone. One less problem to manage in the complicated peace. That night alone, in his study with his diary and his whiskey, Churchill writes the assessment that will matter most. George Patton combined the tactical genius of Napoleon, the courage of Alexander, and the strategic vision of Caesar. He was also profane, occasionally cruel, and utterly unsuited for the bureaucratic warfare of peacetime. The modern world had no place for such a man. Yet that same modern world desperately needed him when the darkness came. This paradox defined him. This paradox defeated him. We celebrate warriors in war and discard them in peace. Perhaps that is necessary. Perhaps that is civilization. But it leaves a bitter taste nonetheless. The years pass. Churchill watches the Cold War develop exactly as Patton predicted. Every event another confirmation of the warrior's vision. 1948. The Berlin blockade. Soviet stranglehold on a divided city. 1950 Korea. The first hot war of the Cold War era. 1956 Hungary. Brave uprising crushed by Soviet tanks while the West watches helplessly. Each event brings the same thought unbidden: Patton was right. In August 1961, Churchill is 86 years old, long retired from politics, watching history unfold from his home in Chartwell. His health is failing, his body betraying him. But his mind remains sharp enough to understand what he's witnessing on the television. The Berlin Wall, concrete and barbed wire dividing a city, families separated, people shot trying to cross from east to west, the physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain he warned about 16 years earlier. His aide finds him in his study, staring at the television screen, tears on his weathered face. "Sir, are you all right?" Churchill doesn't look away from the images of East German soldiers stringing wire. "I was just remembering something General Patton told me. Potsdam, summer of 1945. He said we should advance to Berlin and Prague before the Soviets. That stopping at the Elbe was strategic insanity, that the Russians weren't our friends but our next enemy. He was wrong, though, sir. Starting a war with the Soviets in 1945 would have been catastrophic." Churchill is quiet for a very long time. When he speaks, his voice is barely a whisper. Would it have prevented this? He gestures weakly at the television, at the wall being built, at the millions being imprisoned behind it. Perhaps Patton's war would have been shorter. Perhaps fewer would have died. Perhaps we'd be living in a free world instead of this. This twilight struggle between nuclear powers with half of Europe enslaved. We can't know that, sir. No, we can't. But I wonder if the warrior saw more clearly than all the statesmen combined. If the man everyone called reckless was actually the only one brave enough to face reality. That evening in his private study, Churchill takes out his diary. His hand shakes with age, but the words are clear. If we had listened to Patton about the Soviets in 1945... He stops, pen hovering over paper. The sentence incomplete. He sits for 5 full minutes trying to finish the thought. But some truths are too painful to commit to paper even in private. Some admissions of failure cut too deep. Finally, he sets down the pen. The sentence remains unfinished. It will stay unfinished until his death 4 years later, when his papers are sealed for a quarter century. When those papers are finally opened in 1990, the timing is almost prophetic. The Berlin Wall has just fallen. The Cold War is ending. The Soviet Union is collapsing. Historians find that incomplete sentence and debate its meaning. What was Churchill about to admit? That Patton was right? That the West made a catastrophic mistake? That the warrior's warning should have been heeded? The sentence offers no answers, just the question mark of history. December 24th, 1945. Luxembourg, American Cemetery. Patton is buried among the men he led into battle. No special treatment. No grand monument. Just another white cross among thousands, though his is marked with 4 stars. Eisenhower stands at the graveside watching the coffin lowered into frozen ground. Around him, hundreds of white crosses stretch in perfect rows, young men who died in a war that had to be fought. A reporter approaches after the ceremony. General Eisenhower, do you have any comment on General Patton's death? Eisenhower is quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. General Patton was the finest battlefield commander I ever worked with. He could achieve objectives other generals thought impossible. He saved countless lives through his speed and aggression. He was also the most difficult subordinate I ever commanded. The reporter scribbles notes. Those 2 facts are inseparable, Eisenhower continues. You cannot have one without the other. The same qualities that made him invaluable in war made him impossible in peace. History will judge which was more important. Do you think he was right about the Russians, sir? Eisenhower looks out over the rows of graves at all those young men who won't grow old. I think General Patton saw the world differently than most people. Sometimes that vision was clearer. Sometimes it was distorted by his own nature. Time will tell. It's a politician's answer from a man who will soon become a politician. But it's also true. He thinks about Casablanca, about the 48 hours he had to decide, about the intelligence intercept that said the Germans feared only Patton, about choosing the brilliant bastard over the safe option. He's never regretted that choice, not through Sicily or Normandy or Bastogne. Patton won battles, Patton saved lives. Patton was exactly what Churchill said he was the right man for a desperate time. But standing here among the graves, Eisenhower also thinks about the cost. The 2 soldiers Patton slapped, the diplomatic incidents, the warnings about Russia that proved true too late to matter. Was it worth it? He looks at the thousands of white crosses and knows the answer. Every one of these men got to go home because the war ended sooner, because Patton moved fast, because audacity sometimes trumps caution. Yes, it was worth it. But that doesn't make it simple. That doesn't make it clean. War never is. 75 years later, military academies still teach Patton's tactics. The relief of Bastogne is a case study in mobile warfare. The Rhine crossing is textbook audacity. The race across France is studied for its logistics and speed. But they teach something else too. They teach about the slapping incidents, about insubordination, about the difference between battlefield effectiveness and moral leadership. Because Patton's legacy is not simple. Nothing about him was ever simple. He was a brilliant tactician who saved thousands of lives through speed and aggression. He was also a bully who traumatized soldiers suffering from combat stress. He was a visionary who predicted the Cold War 15 years before most politicians acknowledged it. He was also politically naive and temperamentally unsuited for the complex diplomacy of peacetime. He was exactly what the Allies needed to win World War II. He was exactly what they couldn't tolerate after it ended. Churchill understood this paradox. He lived it himself. The wartime leader voted out of office months after victory. The romantic imperialist in the age of decolonization. The warrior statesman in the age of bureaucrats. That's why Churchill recognized Patton as a kindred spirit in Casablanca, 1943. Not because they were alike in tactics or temperament, but because they were both relics of a dying age. Both men who belonged in history books, but happened to be alive when history needed them most. Their partnership changed the war. Churchill's political protection allowed Patton to keep fighting. Patton's battlefield success vindicated Churchill's judgment. Together, they proved that sometimes the brilliant bastards are exactly what desperate times require. But they also proved something darker, that the qualities civilization celebrates in wartime become liabilities in peace. That the heroes we need in darkness become problems we discard in light. The questions they raised remain unanswered. If Patton had been allowed to advance to Berlin and Prague in 1945, would the Cold War have been prevented? Or would World War III have consumed the world in nuclear fire? If Churchill's warnings about the Iron Curtain had been heeded earlier, would millions have been spared enslavement? Or would Western unity have fractured under the pressure? If Eisenhower had relieved Patton after the slapping incidents, would Sicily have taken longer? Would more soldiers have died? Or would a more conventional commander have achieved the same results with less controversy? History doesn't answer. It only forces us to live with our choices. Eisenhower chose the brilliant bastard in Casablanca, 1943. That choice won battles and saved lives. It also created endless diplomatic headaches and moral complications. Churchill endorsed that choice knowing its cost. He protected Patton when others wanted him gone.
He recognized the warrior's value, even when others saw only problems. Patton fought with everything he had, then warned about what came next. That warning went unheeded for decades, but it was correct. 3 impossible men, 3 different roles, one partnership that changed history. The statesman who saw beyond convention, the administrator who chose results over comfort, the warrior who saw the future and couldn't change it. Together, they won a war.
Apart, they couldn't prevent the next one. But perhaps that's the lesson. Perhaps the tension between careful administrators and reckless warriors, between diplomatic statesmen and prophetic voices, between those who preserve alliances and those who win battles. Perhaps that tension is what civilization requires, not one or the other, both, in constant friction, in perpetual struggle, the careful and the audacious, the diplomat and the warrior, the statesman and the brilliant bastard. Patton and Churchill understood this instinctively. They were opposites in many ways. British restraint versus American aggression. Political sophistication versus tactical genius, the art of the possible versus the demand for the impossible. But they shared something essential, the understanding that sometimes rules must be broken, that sometimes the difficult choice is the right choice, that sometimes civilization needs its monsters to fight off greater monsters. They were men out of time, but they were exactly the men that time required. And the questions they leave us with matter more than the answers. When civilization faces its darkest hour, who should command? The careful administrators who preserve alliances, or the reckless warriors who win battles? When a brilliant mind comes packaged with an impossible personality, do you accept both or reject both? When someone warns of future dangers that the world isn't ready to hear, do you listen anyway, or wait until pain forces belief? Patton and Churchill would tell you there are no easy answers, just hard choices, and the willingness to make them when everyone else hesitates. That willingness changed the 20th century. The rest is for history to judge, and history is still writing its verdict.